Hey, Wellness Warriors. Welcome back to another episode of the Wellness Revolution. I'm your host, Dr. Mylaine Riobé. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm the founder of Awakened Wellness Now. I've been in practice for over 20 years in private practice. I'm your host. I'm your host, Dr. Mylaine Riobé. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm the founder of Awakened Wellness Now. I'm also a practicing clinician in the field of integrative medicine, formally accepted in 2014 as a medical subspecialty. Integrative medicine is essentially a holistic brand of medicine where we use the best of Eastern medicine, as well as functional medicine, and also mainstream medicine to combine into a very powerful, very holistic, and integrative, just as it sounds, system of medicine. So we endeavor to find the root causes of symptoms and conditions to help people thrive and live better lives. And so Awaken Wellness Now is dedicated to burnout resolution, prevention, and well-being. In today's episode, we're exploring the biggest cause of burnout you've never heard of. And for those of you that listened to my previous podcast, Awakened Wellness Now, you know that I love to talk about SIBO. I'm always sounding the alarm on SIBO. SIBO is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So it's a very underdiagnosed, very poorly understood infection of the small intestine. And for those of you that want to hear more about SIBO, what it is, how we look for it, how we treat it, and how clients recover from it, comment below and let me know. And I'll post one of my archived podcasts from Awaken Wellness Now here so you can watch it. But in today's episode, what I want to talk about is the spiritual meaning of SIBO. What does it mean spiritually? What does it mean when someone has a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth? Now, in the fields of functional and integrative medicine, we have recognized SIBO for about 20 years and have been treating it. Now, that's not to say that SIBO wasn't studied by mainstream medicine for all that time. It was. It's simply that there was a lot of resistance to admitting that it was actually a disease. And when I went to medical school, we were taught that the small intestine was a sterile environment and that it doesn't get infected. And so it made sense why mainstream medicine pushed back so hard when the data was starting to come out to say that, yeah, the small intestine not only can get infected, but it can cause diseases if it's not treated. And so, for many years, we've been treating SIBO in my practice and in many other integrative medicine practices. And we've seen firsthand the damage that SIBO can actually do. I've had clients come in who have SIBO and hadn't known it for years, essentially be even bedridden at times. I had one client whose wife had to represent him at his office visits for about 3 or 4 visits until he was out of bed, until he could literally open his eyes and move around and participate in a conversation with me. And so I've seen the worst of SIBO. SIBO can also happen in people that are relatively fine, right? They have a little bit of bloating and maybe they have acne instead of, the obvious symptoms of SIBO, which can be bloating, loose stools, constipation, heartburn, nausea. So it can be super minor and it can be super severe, and it can cause diseases. And the idea that 70% of the American population has SIBO is shocking. And we're starting to discover also that 90% of patients who are diagnosed with IBS or irritable bowel syndrome actually have SIBO. And so SIBO is a treatable condition. The danger of SIBO is in the fact that A, it causes your inability to absorb your own food. And so the issue here isn't that we don't know about SIBO and that people aren't starting to become more aware about SIBO. The real issue is the actual spiritual or psychological meaning of SIBO. What does it mean when you get SIBO? Why do we get SIBO and why is it so common? And so for that, we have to look at TCM. TCM actually gives us this information, and they've known it for thousands of years. TCM is traditional Chinese medicine. It's an ancient system of medicine that's about 4,000 years old. So their system of medicine is based on the fact that every small part of your body reflects your entire body. And we proved that to ourselves in 2005 when we mapped out the human genome. And we were a little bit shocked to find out that every single cell in our body, so we have about 50 to 70 trillion cells that make up the human body. Every single one of them has the genetic code of the entire body in it, which when you think about it is shocking because an eye cell, for example, has the code, the genetic code of what it needs to be an eye cell, and it has the entire code of the entire body in it. So it also has the code to be a liver cell, a heart cell, a brain cell, a skin cell. And yet it knows itself to be an eye cell, right? Your eye cell doesn't wake up on a Monday morning and decide it's going to become a liver cell because it has a genetic code of the liver in it. So it's kind of shocking that the cells are somewhat like self-aware. There's some kind of hidden communication in the human body that allows an eye cell to know itself to be an eye cell and only express the genes that would code for that function. And a heart cell to know itself to be a heart cell and not express the genes of all the other cells. And so it's kind of mind-blowing when you actually sit and think a little deeper about what it means that every small part of the body reflects the entire body. And they knew this thousands of years ago when they developed their entire system of medicine based on it. And this is why when you see a TCM practitioner, you come to our office, we'll ask you a bunch of questions that sound a little strange, but what we're trying to do is form patterns. Once we know the pattern, or once we think we know the pattern, what we then do is look at your tongue and we examine the tongue, what it looks like. And also we feel the quality of your pulse. And so that helps us to then confirm the pattern that we know you to have. And then that's what informs the Chinese herbal medicines that we may prescribe, the acupuncture points we would use to do acupuncture. It's based on this pattern diagnosis. And so TCM knows a lot about physiology. It knows so much about metabolism. It really understands fundamentally the patterns that underlie symptoms and conditions. And so I rely on TCM a lot to help fill in the gaps of what our modern medical system just doesn't yet understand. And so TCM explains the functions of the small intestine in such a way that we can really begin to understand the hidden meanings behind getting an infection such as SIBO. Like, what does it mean? And why is SIBO so hard to treat? Right. So we understand in some ways why SIBO is hard to treat, right? The testing is kind of crude. It's not terribly accurate. And so we also don't even map out the bacteria that are responsible for causing SIBO. And so we can't really tailor the treatments of SIBO yet. So that's part of it. But there's something else going on with SIBO that makes it hard to treat. Some people, due to the ongoing stress that they have in their lives, the weakening of their immune system, no matter how many protocols that you use to treat SIBO for certain people, it's really hard to get rid of, right? Those bacteria seem to be really entrenched in the body, and the immune system seems to be really weakened. So one of the main functions of the small intestine, according to TCM theory, is that the small intestine separates the pure from the impure. And it allows the pure to be absorbed into the body and go up to the heart. And it pretty much lets go of what it would discern as impure to let that continue through the small intestine to the large intestine, where it can be eliminated as waste, as urine or stool. And so the idea that the small intestine is able to discern the pure from the impure is also emotional. So the heart actually transmits energy to the small intestine. So when we look at the heart and the small intestine as TCM organs, they form a pair. And so they have a yin and yang relationship. The heart is the internal pair of the pair, and the small intestine is the external of the pair. And so they work intimately together. And so the energy of the heart flows to the small intestine according to TCM theory. And so when we look at the small intestine as an organ of discernment, so emotions are also coming into the small intestine. Thoughts are also coming in. Experiences, feelings are also coming into the small intestine because we actually filter those things through our heart. All of our emotions, all of our feelings actually impact the heart. And so from that, that chi, that energy, that vibration of those emotions are transmitted to the small intestine. And it's up to the small intestine to then discern, what do I keep and what do I get rid of? And so when we think of toxic emotions, when we think of fear-based emotions, these are obviously things we don't want to hold on to. And so it's actually the small intestine that allows us to have that discernment, to set those boundaries, and to allow those more toxic or fear-based emotions to just pass through. It lets them go so that they can continue down and be eliminated from the body. And so the small intestine is an energy field also. It's not just a physical structure. So the emotion of the heart and the small intestine is actually joy. The element is fire. And so fire is very transformative. The season of the heart and small intestine is summer. And so the heart, small intestine are most active in the summer, and they are very integral in managing emotions, in letting go of old, stale emotions, and things that we don't need to be holding on to. And so during this very transformative time on our planet, where the new earth is evolving. And we can look at this in many ancient books, right? It's talked about in the Vedic texts. It's the golden age. It's the age of Aquarius. Even in, the end of times in the Bible, all of them talk about this time that we're going through, the end of the Mayan calendar, right? It's around this time that we're experiencing these great transformations in our being, on our planet. So when we're looking at transformation, when we're looking at raising our vibration, that requires a little bit of fire, right? Because we have to raise our vibration. We have to let go of things that are dense and heavy and no longer serve us so that we can be more buoyant, right? There's not actually anything we need to necessarily do to actively raise our vibration. It's simply that we need to let go of the stuff that's anchoring us down, right? So it's not that we need to take all that stuff with us and suddenly like get more energy to go up. It's not like we're trying to like bust out of the Earth's atmosphere, holding on to all our payload. It's literally that we're dropping the payload so that the buoyancy allows us to just float where we're supposed to go. Right. And so it's the holding on of these emotions that no longer serve us that is impacting the small intestine. So what happens when we become overwhelmed, and how this links to burnout as the hidden, the biggest cause of burnout, is because when we start lugging around emotions that no longer serve us, that are perhaps brought back to our memory through triggers that we experience, from our day to day. And a lot of that will happen at work, right? Because we spend a lot of time at work, right? I mean, we put in 40, 60, sometimes 80, 100 hours of work a week, right? And so that's where we are most of the time. And so it just makes sense that those things are triggered by the workplace. But again, remember that burnout is not a workplace situation. It just happens to be that we're there a lot. And so we get triggered in the environments that we're in the most, right? But we can also be burnt out at home. We can be burnt out pretty much anywhere, right? We take our burnout with us wherever we go. So it's not something that it's at work, and then when I walk into work, I have burnout. When I leave work, burnout stays at work. We understand that we carry that with us. According to TCM, imbalances in the small intestine occur from overwhelm, or what we would translate as, stress, basically. I've long suspected that SIBO is due to stress, although again, mainstream medicine hasn't quite said that yet. If we look at the causes of SIBO in our mainstream model, we'll see things like probiotics are being implicated. Of course, underlying medical conditions that might impact immunity or what we call the motility of the muscles of the gastrointestinal system, where the flow of, the contraction of the muscles is slower than it should be. So of course, yes, these are all potential causes of SIBO. However, what causes them, right? What causes, the gut doesn't just randomly move too slowly, right? Also, low stomach acidity is another potential cause. Well, what causes that? So when we keep going back and asking ourselves, okay, well, why does that happen? And why does that happen? And why does that happen? Ultimately, we get to stress as, the ultimate cause of just about everything, right? So this is why Harvard University, for example, is publishing studies now to say that stress is responsible for about 95% of all diseases. And again, we tend to isolate stress as some kind of psychological thing. We isolate burnout as a psychological condition, but it's not. We cannot separate the psychological from the physical. It's impossible. Trying to separate something that's psychological from physical is more or less something we do in our heads, right? It doesn't actually exist. It's just something we do to categorize things. So when we carry that out into our definitions and into how we end up assessing and evaluating and treating things, this kind of sends us off on these tangents where we don't get the answers that we need. So to say that burnout is psychological is not true. We have to also understand that burnout is physical. There are physiological responses to the psychological stressors that translate into physical things happening in our body, right? So when these emotions come in, when we're having these experiences and these emotions come in, and they impact the heart and then they get transmitted to the small intestine, that energy, that vibration gets transmitted there. And if those organs are not vibrating at their proper frequencies, then they go out of balance, right? We're beginning to understand that everything is energy, everything is a frequency, everything is a vibration, right? And Albert Einstein told this over 100 years ago. He said, sorry to disappoint you, basically, but matter isn't real. Matter is simply energy that's vibrating at such a low frequency that we can see it and touch it, and it appears to be solid to us, and so we call it matter. But that's something we made up in our heads. It's not actually matter. It's just low vibrating energy. And it's the same thing here. We can't really say that something is psychological without also understanding that it's also physical. Yeah, so we need to really start bringing quantum science into medicine so that we can better understand medicine. And this is what the Chinese understood thousands of years ago. They understood that things happen on what we call quantum level, not just on a classical physics level. And that's really important to distinguish. These categories don't really exist. We kind of made them up, right? And so burnout is a combination. You cannot extricate the psychological from the physical. So you have to see it in its totality to really begin to understand burnout. Now, it's actually, in my opinion, a little bit easier to look at the physical because we have tests for it. We have treatments for the physical stuff. So we can kind of break the cycle with the physical stuff. And the impact of doing that affects the psychological, right? So this is why we can treat burnout from either direction, and we should treat it from both directions, right? We should treat it from the direction of mitigating the impact of stress, helping that person to perceive stress differently so that the physiology, is transmitted down differently than if that person doesn't know how to handle their emotions or doesn't know how to interpret those emotions, right? So there's a way that we have to approach it from that and approach it from the physical aspects. So the vital energy of the body, or what we call qi, flows through the small intestine maximally between the hours of 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. And again, if you remember that the element of the small intestine is fire, what's the ball of fire, that's at the highest point during the time of the small intestine, right? That's when the energy is flowing through the small intestine right through high noon, right? When the sun is at the highest maximal point of the day. And so, it's pretty amazing how this all kind of flows together. So when we look at SIBO and its consequences, one of the things that it does is cause what we call leaky gut. A leaky gut is when the bacteria and the toxins that are infecting the small intestine damage the lining of the small intestine, allowing junk, basically waste, bacteria, viruses, undigested food, environmental toxins that come in through the gut, allows them to basically leak through the small intestine into the bloodstream. Now, the bloodstream obviously is a tenaciously protected environment. And so the body does not like that, right? The body, considers that to be a massive problem. Now, the liver is the filter of the bloodstream. And so whatever ends up coming through the gastrointestinal system goes first to the liver so that the liver can then again kind of detox, remove toxins, and separate out what needs to be separated out, so that it can be urinated out through the kidneys and come out through the stool. And so it's almost like a recycling plant, for the garbage. And so when people have SIBO, they put a ton of pressure on their liver unknowingly, right? Because this, again, the small intestine is allowing things to just kind of leak through, right? And so when we think of the spiritual meaning of this, right, when we just let things kind of leak through into our energy field, right, that reminds me of things like boundaries, not having healthy boundaries. So part of how I coach my clients in burnout resolution and prevention is to set healthy boundaries, right, to make sure that you are carving out your work time from your home time and your me time, right? One of the biggest things that I teach is to put yourself first, right? And that's easier said than done, on most days, right? There's always something that wants to kind of take us away, and perhaps there are many things that want to take us away from putting ourselves first. But it's just like, they tell you on the when you're flying, they tell you this, right? Make sure you put your oxygen mask on first before you put it on your children, right? Because if you pass out, there's nobody there to put the mask on your children, right? And it's the same thing in life. If you don't set those healthy boundaries so that you take care of you first, you're not going to be there to take care of others, right? And this is literally what burnout is, right? Literally, burnout is I can barely function. My brain functions off. My executive functioning is off. I can't remember things. I'm exhausted all the time. I'm not happy. I'm anxious. And that can spiral down into, depression and anxiety. Imbalances of the small intestine can also cause mental health issues, right? And so again, when we look at this from a spiritual perspective, this is again not having healthy boundaries and not having discernment, right? What do I keep and what do I let go, right? And that's a very challenging thing for us all to do, especially for women, biological females. We are, naturally the nurturers. We are, by our biology, by our genetics, we are the nurturers, right? Literally, we're the ones that get pregnant and carry, children to term. And so our first inclination is always to take care of others before we take care of ourselves. And we need to literally flip that the other way around and express and exercise that discernment, right? Do I take care of me right now, or do I take care of something else right now, right? And if the question is, I need to get enough sleep, I need to eat, I need to get my exercise in, I need to get my meditation, my breath work in, do I do that or something else? The answer is always do that first, right? Make sure you get your sleep. Make sure you eat properly. Make sure you don't miss meals. Make sure that you get your exercise in. Make sure you do your breath work. Make sure you do your meditation, and get your workouts in. before you do the other stuff. And the reason that works so well when people finally start to do it is because you actually buy time doing that. You buy back your time because there's a way that you're so inefficient when you're burnt out that it takes you so much longer to do something than if you're not burnt out, right? If your mental faculties are focused and sharp, if you have the metabolism to support what you're doing, it happens a lot quicker, right? Things are much easier to organize and to get done. Your executive functions are better. You remember things better. You're just sharper, period. And you're happier, right? And you're more vibrant. And so taking care of yourself first, make sure that you have that higher vibration so that you can then do those other things, right? When we don't put ourselves first, we start out with a lower vibration than where we're supposed to be. And then now we're trying to tackle, things. And so it's very difficult to get your vibration back up, and so what happens then is you attract other low vibration, experiences throughout your day. And then that feeds the cycle of burnout, right? And this is why people struggle to get out of burnout until they decide to put themselves first. And that doesn't mean to be selfish, right? There's a huge distinction between self-care and being selfish, right? Being selfish is kind of like, hard to define, but still it's more like you're putting yourself first, but more out of fear or out of an ulterior motive. That's more like selfish than self-care. Self-care is I'm putting myself first out of self-love and out of love of others, because if my cup's not full, I can't fill anybody else's cup, right? So there's a very important distinction to be made there. And again, the small intestine is what allows us to make this distinction, right? It helps us to discern. And so when we're kind of stuck between, is this selfish? Is this self-care? Like, what is this? There's an imbalance of the small intestine going on, right? And so we'll talk about how to get the small intestine rebalanced later in the podcast. But these are some of the things like indecisiveness, right? Not having clarity, all of these things are imbalances of small intestine energy from essentially, unmanaged emotions, if you will. And sometimes there's circumstances that are not in our direct control, right? We go to work and maybe there's a toxic environment, or, God forbid, we're in our car and we have a fender bender or something, right? But how you manage that really, really matters. And managing it from a position of self-love is so important, so that you don't react, so that you don't get caught up in the brain. The brain wants to hijack you and tell a story about your experience. And this, again, feeds into the burnout. This feeds into the overwhelm of the small intestine, right? And it makes it really hard to get the small intestine back into balance, whether you have SIBO or not, right? You don't have to have SIBO to have a small intestine in balance. There can be obviously stages before you're at the level of having an infection, but still there's an imbalance there. So how can we discern, right, if we're making the right choice, if we're being selfish or self-caring? It's the emotion that you feel when you do it, right? So when you're being selfish, you don't feel a lot of joy, right? You feel fear. You feel perhaps frustration or anger or worry or anxiety, right? But when you are really actually doing something that is self-loving, self-caring, you will feel the joy, you will feel the love, right? You'll feel it. And so this is really important. We need to capture the feeling before it gets translated into our brain into the more negative, uh, stories that your brain likes to tell you when you're in a burnout situation, right? Your brain wants to tell you to worry. Your brain wants to tell you to ruminate or overthink things. Your brain wants to tell you to be sad and anxious, and to be generally fearful, because its job is to keep you, quote unquote, safe in a physical way, right? To make sure that you don't, you know, uh, get ostracized by your group, or get abandoned from the tribe and, things like that. We are herd animals by our nature. And so the brain wants to keep us in the crowd, don't stick out, do what the crowd is doing, right? And that leads us to then focus on the crowd, focus on the external, not pay attention to ourselves, right? Because your brain wants you to not stick out, right? And so you're going to then kind of conform to what the tribe is up to, what the tribe is thinking, what the tribe is doing. The next thing you know, you're externalizing everything. You're nurturing the crowd, not because it's a self-loving act, but because you want to be liked or because you want to be accepted, so that again, you don't feel abandoned or ostracized, right? So there's a way that you can discern that you're feeling that as opposed to like just a true joy. So the emotion of the heart is joy, happiness. And so also the emotion of the small intestine, right? So when that emotion is coming in and kind of being processed, you can capture it. When you ask yourself a question, that first split second, there's an emotion that comes with the answer. And if that's a joyful emotion or feeling, that's usually the right answer. And then if you wait too long, your brain starts analyzing the answer and then it flips you over to the other side, right? To the filtered down emotions of worry and fear and all of the rest of them. So, when you're trying to get yourself out of burnout, you kind of got to capture that like split second moment where you get to hear the quiet emotion, get to hear the quiet feeling, that your heart and your small intestine are propagating to you, right? Before your brain gets it. I get to know my dynamic metabolic type, and then I get to apply it to the 4 pillars of wellness, eat, move, rest, and detox. That's the physical part. But then there's the spiritual part, right? There's the spiritual mind part where I get to really actually look at what caused my burnout, and it's usually acting out of fear so that you don't get ostracized from the group, right? We get socialized at a very young age to conform. We're told what to do, we're told what to wear, we're told what to think so that we belong. And so when we get too mired in that, we get burnt out because it stifles our reality. It stifles who we really, really are. And so then we kind of shove who we really are to the side, and then we put on a mask and we do what we think we need to do. And this is what burns us out, because when we shove our own self aside and we put on a mask, that splits us. When we're split, we're always burning up more energy than we need to, as opposed to being our true self, right? And same thing with stress in the body. It's split, and that's what creates the high demand for energy, the high demand for energy in the body that leads to the burnout, right? Burnout is I ran out of gas for some reason, right? Either the gas is obstructed and it can't flow, and that's, an excess dynamic metabolic type, or it's too depleted, right? That's a deficiency dynamic metabolic type, or a deficient dynamic metabolic type. And so we get to recognize like what brought me to this dynamic metabolic type, right? That's where the stress comes in. That's where the real cause of burnout is found, that led to the physical stuff, but you can't extricate them. And so that's why even if you fix the physical stuff, you still have to work on the stress. You still have to work on the spiritual aspects. Like, what is this saying about me in terms of what I really want? And most of the time burnout expresses as a result of doing things we don't really want to do, right? We feel like our lives are not our own. So finding a way to be yourself, you get to find a great match to be that in the world. When you're a great match for what you're doing, there's no room for burnout to happen, right? Because the joy is there, the happiness is there, the balance is there. There's that discernment. You have the healthy boundaries. You know when to say no, you know when to say yes. You have clarity around what you want to do, and you put yourself first in order for that to be present with you, so that that's what you take out in the world, right? So you've got a much higher vibration. You attract much higher vibration, situations, people, circumstances, and experiences, right? We get what we're a vibrational match for, right? Like attracts like in that sense. And so making sure that we let go of the things that no longer serve us, i.e., all the stuff we've been carrying around with us since we were told what to say, told what to do, told where to go, told how to think. That's all stuff we've been carrying around, carrying around, carrying around. And then eventually it buries who we really are, alive. And so it's just really letting it go. That's not me. That's not me. That's not me. That's not me. And you get to see who me is, right? And you get to put that me first. And so that is the spiritual meaning of a small intestine imbalance, and one of the most common causes of burnout from a psychological, a spiritual, and a physical perspective. So how do we stop the overwhelm or the emotions from coming in that we need to let go of, right? We can't necessarily stop them from coming in, but we can begin to discern like what is mine from what is not mine, right? So how do we begin to put this information to practice so that we can resolve and prevent burnout situations? The first thing is to realize that discernment is really, really important. Like learning to discern who is me, like what is really me from what is not really me. And as we look at, what is this golden age? What is this age of Aquarius? What's happening in New Earth right now? Despite the chaos, right? The chaos goes on. The chaos actually fuels the transformation in many ways. So it's again discerning, not letting the chaos get to you, not letting the chaos take you off balance, which again is easier said than done. It's okay if you go off balance, but just remember that you get to come back into balance, right? You don't have to be swirling out there in chaos and in stress. You can you can learn to process it differently, right? And of course, therapy is really important. Talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. These are all really important. And perhaps, if it's really severe, even a psychiatric evaluation, sometimes even medication is important. But also what's important is the spiritual work. It's really like, what does this mean? And how do I get to change it and transform it within myself? One of the simplest ways to get started is to learn to breathe, right? I was joking with a client of mine um, about how we're literally having to relearn all the basic things that we need to do to simply be alive. Like we need to relearn how to breathe. We need to relearn how to eat. We need to relearn how to exercise, sleep. All these things we're having to relearn because we were taken so far off course by all the modernization and the toxic products and the toxins in the atmosphere and the fake food that we're being fed, like all of that took us so far away from our natural rhythm that we're having to relearn how to do all these things. And so breathing is one of the most important things to relearn. This is like lesson one in the Wellness Warrior 9-week transformation program. We dive a lot deeper into the breathing and why it's important and the techniques. But, simply put, it's inhaling through the nose for 5 seconds in and 5 seconds out. It's a 10-second breath. You're breathing 6 times a minute. The magic of that is that you are retraining your brain in many ways to be more quiet. So when the brain is really loud, it's really hard to feel the feelings that precede the loudness of the brain because it's quick. The brain is very fast. So as soon as you feel a feeling, your brain is on it, like interpreting. What does it mean? What does that remind me of? Like, how does that keep me safe? Like, what's happening? Right? It's a split second. And so we really need to learn to breathe in such a way that's almost slows the brain down. It relaxes the brain in such a way that it's not so reactive, so we can open up the space to sit with our breath so that we can feel the feeling of joy more. When you're breathing properly and you're taking a nice deep breath, it feels joyful because you are flooding your body with oxygen. When you flood your body with oxygen, you are triggering the side of the brain that is more relaxed, creative, happy, as opposed to the panic, fight or flight, stress side of the brain. It's not that they're managed necessarily in different sides of the brain, but the brain controls the nervous system, and the nervous system has two arms, the autonomic nervous system. It's got the sympathetic fight or flight side, and it's got the parasympathetic calm, relaxed side. And so the brain controls that, but it only controls it properly if you're breathing properly. Otherwise, if you're not breathing properly, your brain is all over the place and it's going to default to stress. And again, in TCM, they teach us that the heart is the commander of the body, not the brain. It's actually the heart, according to TCM. And again, the Institute of Heart Math has shown us scientifically why that is. And so when we breathe, we are activating what they call heart brain, or the electromagnetic field of the heart, which is at least 100 times stronger than the electromagnetic field of the brain. And so when we breathe properly, we take that deeper breath, we are putting the heart in command of the body. And so again, that's really key, because when you put the heart in command of the body, now you are controlling the emotions. You are filtering the emotions in such a way that it's more joyful. You're more calm, you're happier. What your brain is doing is it's sending down some oxytocin, some dopamine, some serotonin. All the feel-good hormones are activated when you take a proper breath. And the magic of heart math is they've shown that you don't have to do that all day long. You only have to do it for 3 minutes, 3 times a day. And so 9 minutes out of your day, broken up into 3 parts, covers your whole day, is what they're showing at the Institute of Heart Math. And this is through the use of the what's now being, probably going to become a vital sign, which is heart rate variability. And so heart rate variability is being shown in studies to be a marker of health. When you have high heart rate variability, you're more relaxed, you're happier. And so you kind of slow the brain down, because it's one of its really main jobs is to keep you safe. So it's always looking for threats. So if you're sending the signal that you're safe, it's less likely to be looking for threats. When the body is able to get a lot more oxygen, it gets to make a lot more energy. So we make 18 times more energy with oxygen than without oxygen. So when you're shallow breathing, there are pockets of cells in your body that will not get enough oxygen, and they will be shortchanged. They will not be able to make as much energy. And this contributes to burnout. And so again, this is how we can't separate the spiritual from the physical, from the mental. It's impossible to do, so proper breathing feeds your spirit, it feeds your mind, and it feeds your body in so many ways. And so that's the number one way to start getting that overwhelm and that stress out. That allows you to think so much more clearly, so that you know how to move through your day with your proper boundaries, with your self-care in place, so that you move in the world in a way that brings you peace and joy. Another really useful tip is emotional freedom technique, or what we call tapping. It is basically kind of a very mild form of acupuncture in many ways, because we're tapping over acupuncture points. And there's a very rhythmic way that you tap, so that you are moving the energy through the body in a much smoother way, so that you can release that which no longer serves you, right? And again, that's the small intestine's job, is to let go of what's not supposed to be in the body, so that it comes out through waste. And so on a spiritual or energetic level, we're literally like tapping and loosening that energy, so that it moves through the body and it is released from the body. So that's a really critical way of letting go. of things that no longer serve you to lighten the load, if you will, so that you're more buoyant. You get to vibrate higher if you let go of the things that no longer serve you. Just like when you're in a hot air balloon, right? You have to take those bags off so that the hot air can rise into the sky, right? And so it's really important to do the same thing with emotional baggage that's not yours, right? The only emotion that really belongs to us is joy, is love. The other ones should be just passing through, like they shouldn't hang out, so they get to pass through and leave, through the back door. So emotional freedom technique, you can look that up on Google. There's some really good videos. There are practitioners, so if you want to learn, formally how to do emotional freedom technique, there are many excellent practitioners out there that can guide you through. The third tip that I love to give to my clients is Qigong. So Qigong is a moving meditation. And so you are breathing rhythmically and moving rhythmically in a way that, again, moves the qi through the body. And it also harnesses qi. It also gathers the qi. So it's very restorative in the way that it allows you to build up your energy and also to let go of energy that's not yours, that, those fear-based emotions, those memories that are associated with those fear-based emotions. You get to discharge them. You get to remove the charge from them that makes them triggers. So Qigong is a really, really powerful tool to help, again, build energy if you're burnt out, as well as get rid of energy if that burnout is from an excessive dynamic metabolic type as well. So it's really good for both sides. So this is why it's such a balanced exercise to do. And again, you can work with a Qigong master. You can watch some videos online. So if it's something you really want to learn how to do really well, I recommend that you work with a Qigong master for some time until you have the movements down. And so that's what I have for today. And I hope that you found this podcast to be very informative and useful. So to learn more, please visit our website, awakenwellnessnow.com. I also offer the Wellness Warrior 9-week transformation program. It's a 9-week online course with live lessons with me so that you get empowered to not just put yourself first, but to learn the hidden language of your body that we're often taught and socialized to ignore, that leads us down the path to burnout. So you'll learn how to get your mind in the game, know your dynamic metabolic type, and apply it to your 4 pillars of wellness each and every day to live your best life right now. We do have corporate burnout prevention programs as well, and we have our Mighty Networks community for our online course members so that we can keep you motivated and on the path to burnout prevention and wholeness. Feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn and to follow us on Instagram. Until next time, many blessings.